Greenland a territory of Denmark, a NATO ally, since 1949. Presidential advisor Stephen Miller refused to rule out the use of force to annex Greenland. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen responded with an unprecedented warning: everything will stop. NATO will end. In NATO's 77-year history, no American president has ever threatened military action against a fellow ally. France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, the United Kingdom, and Denmark immediately issued a joint statement: Greenland belongs to its people. Only Denmark and Greenland can decide its future. But while European capitals were still searching for answers, one leader moved decisively: Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney. At the Paris conference on January 6th, he stated plainly, "We stand with Denmark and Greenland." The question is no longer whether NATO could fracture, but who will step forward to redefine the Western security order. The Paris conference, held on January 5th and 6th, 2026, brought together more than 30 countries officially to discuss security guarantees for Ukraine. But behind the public sessions, another crisis was unfolding. Mark Carney didn't come to Paris just to talk about Ukraine. He held a private meeting with Prime Minister Frederiksen, and shortly afterward, a major announcement followed: Canada will open a consulate in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. Governor-General Mary Simon and Foreign Minister Anita Anand are scheduled to travel to Greenland in early February to formally inaugurate the diplomatic mission. This was not a symbolic gesture. While Trump threatens NATO allies, Canada is building real diplomatic infrastructure on the very territory Washington is openly eyeing. The message to Copenhagen was unmistakable. Canada isn't just talking about alliance solidarity, it's willing to physically show up to defend Danish sovereignty. At the same time, on the other side of the Atlantic, Washington was igniting another crisis. At 2 a.m. on January 3rd, 2026, Operation Absolute Resolve struck Caracas. Around 200 U.S. troops captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores and transported them to New York to face drug trafficking charges. 32 Cuban security personnel guarding Maduro were killed. Venezuelan civilians also died in the operation. Trump justified the action by invoking the Monroe Doctrine, a 19th century concept claiming U.S. authority to intervene across the Western Hemisphere. Global reaction was sharply divided, condemned the operation as a violation of sovereignty and the UN Charter. Argentina, France, Germany, Israel, Peru, and Ukraine welcomed it. The United Kingdom remained cautious, saying more information was needed. The UN Security Council met in emergency session on January 5th, but failed to reach any consensus. Canada responded differently. Carney neither publicly condemned nor endorsed the operation. Instead, he stated that Canada supports a peaceful Venezuelan-led transition process and emphasized the sovereign rights of the Venezuelan people. The implicit message was unmistakable. National sovereignty is not negotiable, whether in Greenland or in Caracas. Within just 72 hours, two models of power became unmistakably clear. The United States threatened a NATO ally and launched a military intervention in Venezuela. Canada, by contrast, respected sovereignty and strengthened alliances through diplomacy. Across Europe, a question is now being asked quietly, but urgently, one few leaders are willing to say out loud. If the United States is willing to threaten Denmark today, what does NATO's Article 5, the promise of collective defense, actually mean anymore? UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer stated plainly that only Greenland and Denmark have the right to decide Greenland's future. Finnish President Alexander Stubb requested an immediate meeting with Mark Carney in Paris. Nordic foreign ministers from Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark issued a joint statement affirming Greenland's right to self-determination. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk warned that threatening a NATO ally weakens the entire alliance. These statements were not random. They reflect a deeper strategic reality. Europe is searching for more reliable partners, and Canada is emerging at exactly the right moment. Carney understands this. In Paris, he structured his message with deliberate hierarchy. We stand with Denmark and Greenland. Alliance solidarity came first. The relationship with the United States was not rejected, but it was no longer treated as the unquestioned priority. This was a subtle but powerful diplomatic signal. Canada is willing to act as a bridge between Europe and North America, but on the basis of principles, not coercion. The contrast with how Trump wields power could not be sharper. Trump governs through threat toward Greenland, toward Venezuela, and even toward long-standing allies. This strategy creates short-term shock, but it erodes long-term trust. Every time Trump declares that the use of the military is always an option, he isn't just threatening one country, he is casting doubt on the entire security architecture the United States itself built after 1949. Carney operates on the opposite logic. Instead of loud declarations, he held a private meeting with Frederickson. Instead of threats, he opened a consulate. Instead of demanding that European nations choose sides, he allowed them to conclude on their own that Canada represents a more stable alternative. This is not American-style hard power. It is carefully calculated soft power-building trust through consistent action, not empty promises. And it's working. When President Stubb requested a meeting with Carney, it wasn't diplomatic courtesy. Finland, a country with a 1,340-kilometer border with Russia, and a NATO member only since 2023, is reassessing who its most reliable partners will be in the years ahead. When Nordic foreign ministers issued their joint statement, they weren't just defending Denmark. They were testing the contours of a new alignment, one in which Canada could play a central role. The question is no longer whether NATO will survive. The question is who will shape the transatlantic security architecture of the next decade. In Nuuk, Greenland's capital, a local mayor sits in his office overlooking the icy bay. He has just learned that Canada will open a consulate in his city in early February. For the first time in my life, he told a local journalist, a major country is treating us like people with the right to choose not land to be fought over. For Greenland's 57,000 residents, this crisis is not a geopolitical chess match played on a global board. It is a simple existential question. Do they have the right to decide their own future or not? In Copenhagen, a veteran Danish diplomat, someone who has served inside NATO for more than 30 years, admitted something he had never said before. For the first time, he no longer sees Article 5 as an absolute guarantee. If the United States is willing to threaten us today, he said in an interview, on condition of anonymity, why should we believe it would defend us against Russia tomorrow? Then he added quietly, Carney understands that. He doesn't need to say much. Opening a consulate in Nuuk says everything. In Ottawa, Chrystia Freeland Canada's former Deputy Prime Minister has just resigned as Canada's special envoy for Ukraine's reconstruction to take on an unpaid role as an economic advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The move sparked intense controversy. Conservative MP Michael Chong criticized the decision, saying, "You can't be a Canadian lawmaker and serve as an advisor to a foreign government." But Carney backed Freeland, and the implicit message was unmistakable. Canada is willing to support democratic allies with its best human capital, even when that support creates political friction at home. In Caracas, a Venezuelan oil engineer who lost his job after U.S. sanctions were imposed in 2019 watches the news of Maduro's arrest with mixed emotions. Maduro is a dictator. No one denies that he said, but foreign troops attacking our capital at 2 a.m, arresting our president, good or bad, that isn't liberation. That's invasion. 32 Cuban security personnel were killed during the operation, but the number of Venezuelan casualties has not been officially released. Those families aren't concerned with the Monroe Doctrine or legal debates at the UN Security Council. They only know that someone they loved died in an operation Washington describes as law enforcement. In Helsinki, a 22-year-old international relations student follows the crisis on social media. She writes on her personal blog, "My parents' generation grew up believing NATO was an absolute guarantee. My generation is learning how to question that belief. Canada can't replace the United States militarily, but maybe what we need isn't more military power. Maybe what we need is trust." This is what Trump fails to understand and Carney understands deeply. Ultimate power doesn't lie in the number of aircraft carriers or nuclear warheads you possess. It lies in whether others believe you will keep your word. We are witnessing a historic moment. For the first time in 77 years, NATO is facing a crisis not from an external enemy, but from one of its founding powers. Trump threatens allies, Carney builds trust. One relies on military force, the other relies on diplomatic principles. The question is no longer whether Canada can replace the United States militarily. The answer is no. The real question is this: in a world where trust is becoming scarcer than power, who will shape the future of Western security?